What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you a non-spoiler review for MaXXXine. So of course this is the third movie in the Ty West X Trilogy, and I did get to see X in theaters. It was actually a movie I just randomly went to go see, and it was a movie I thought was pretty decent. I didn't think it was fantastic. A lot of people love X, and I just thought it was an alright slasher. I enjoyed it for the most part. And then Pearl comes out, and I actually did a reaction to it on this channel, and I liked Pearl a lot more, and actually it was honestly one of my favorite horror movies of 2022. And so I was looking forward to MaXXXine. I knew it was a sequel to X, and I didn't know what they were going to do with it because obviously both of those movies, X and Pearl, they stand on their own quite a bit. They don't really have to be watched together. You can watch those movies separately just fine. And I was really wondering, is MaXXXine going to be a movie just like that? And after seeing MaXXXine, you kinda can see it without seeing the prior films, but I do think watching X especially is important for a lot of MaXXXine's character, obviously, but at the same time, I don't think it's like 1000% required like it is for most sequels. I think you could get away with not seeing X and going to see MaXXXine. But again, I recommend seeing X because it does add to the character. Pearl, you definitely could skip and still understand this movie. So I don't recommend skipping it because I think it's a good movie, but you could, and I don't think you would be lost at all here. But overall, I'm just gonna go through the positives and the negatives, and then we'll get into a rating out of 10. Again, all spoiler free. Let's start off with the positives. First things first, the 1980s Hollywood aesthetic is gorgeous. It is one of my favorite movie aesthetics you can possibly do. I just love all the colors and just the feel of it, the music that they have throughout the film. It's fantastic, and it's the entire movie like this. So I knew from the trailers I was gonna love that aspect of this movie for sure, and let me tell you, it does not disappoint. The movie is very well directed. The cinematography is amazing. I mean, so was X and Pearl. I think that's what they, excel in at more than anything. It's just how amazing they look as movies. Like you could tell there's some solid filmmakers behind this product. Like they know where to move the camera, they know how to make beautiful looking shots, everything looks amazing, and obviously the aesthetic adds a lot to that. When it comes to the cast, it's probably the best cast out of any of these movies in the X trilogy. You have, of course, Mia Goth coming back again, obviously, as MaXXXine, and she doesn't give her best performance she's given in this trilogy, but she does, in my opinion, give her best performance as MaXXXine, because I do think she completely outshines herself compared to her character in X. But obviously her playing Pearl in Pearl it's hard to beat that. I think that's one of the best performances in a horror movie ever, if I'm going to be honest. So definitely was hard to beat that, but she does a great job here as MaXXXine. I think there's a lot of solid scenes. She doesn't talk a lot in the movie. I think MaXXXine's just in general a very quiet character. She was the same way in X. She's very shy, very reserved to herself. So she doesn't have a lot of scenes where she's actively speaking a lot, but when she does, it's amazing. And even just scenes where she's not talking, she still just does a lot with her face that I think is very, very fitting for the character. So all that was fantastic. She did a great job. Kevin Bacon has a pretty significant role in this movie. I was expecting him to be a significant role because he was in a lot of the trailer, and yes, he did not disappoint at all. He was a fantastic character. He plays a private investigator in this. I'm not going to go into any more detail onto who his character is, but he plays a really interesting character who, honestly, one of my favorite Kevin Bacon performances. I don't know about one of my favorites, but he's up there. It's definitely one of the better ones I've seen of him. He does a great job. And then Giancarlo Esposito has a role in this movie. It's a kind of a small role, so don't expect too much of him, but it's actually a role that I quite enjoyed. I think he did a great job with it, and he's always a treat to see in a movie, so I was totally on board with him in the movie, and he has actually a couple of the only comedic lines in the whole movie, so definitely liked his role in this film. The overall theming of this movie fits very well with the rest of the X trilogy. Of course, this whole trilogy has been mostly about, the stardom, sex work, and in general, the public opinion of those industries, or just how it affects the people within the industries. And this probably goes the furthest with that out of any of these movies, because obviously Pearl was, Pearl wanted to be a star of the whole movie, and then later on she starts to feel like she's just not gonna be able to do that unless she becomes someone she's not. And then of course X was just her in the act of creating pornography, and the jealousy that came across from the character of Pearl, and all that stuff was really interesting. But this movie just goes really far into Hollywood itself. MaXXXine's here trying to get herself kind of out of the porn industry, or at least she's trying to go into other industries. I'm not sure if she was necessarily trying to leave porn completely, but that was a big aspect of her character here. She was trying to elevate herself to become now a movie star, and she's attempting to get into just Hollywood whatever way she can. And there's quite a lot of characters, quite a lot of public opinion here who don't want to see her succeed because of where she came from, whether it's because they have a problem with that line of work, or they have just, or rather a lot of it has religious reasons as well for all these characters. And that is a prominent part of this movie, and I think it is really well handled. All that commentary is really good. There was one or two scenes where I felt like it was a little bit on the nose, like they had a character just straight up monologuing the entirety of what the theming of this movie is, to the point where if you didn't understand this movie, you probably didn't listen to that scene, because it's literally just a character just giving you it straight to you. But I still do think that the general theme of it is well done for the most part. And the actual mystery here, what's going on in this movie, again, I don't want to get too specific because of spoilers. I do think it is a well-handled mystery. I do think it's interesting. The whole time I was incredibly intrigued as to what it was going to be. I personally couldn't predict it. My girlfriend apparently could, though, so I guess maybe I'm in the minority there, but I couldn't predict it. And then when it came to the point where it was revealed what's going on, I was kind of surprised, and I thought it actually worked kind of well. But now let's get into the negatives, because there is a few things I want to talk about here. The first big one is that it doesn't really feel like a horror movie, which might sound strange, but let me explain. So I don't think that's necessarily a really bad negative, because at the end of the day, I don't think every horror movie needs to be full on horror. It could be, you know, partially horror, but there's a lot of other aspects to it. Like, that's okay. That's not a big problem for me. But when you go into a movie expecting full-on horror and you don't really truly get that, at least in my experience, I didn't feel like it was full-on horror. I personally felt just a slightly disappointed there, because honestly, like, I can't see that many horror aspects in this movie. Yes, there's hints of slasher there, but they don't really go far with it to the point where I don't really feel like I would ever call this a slasher movie. There's definitely a mystery there for sure, you know, and there is a horrifying backstory behind this mystery. So I would call it a horror movie, but again, it's like they don't go that far with it, if you know what I mean. There's gore, sure, some moments of gore, not a lot, not as much as X, but it doesn't go, like, again, it doesn't go far with it. And I guess you could say the same thing for Pearl. Pearl didn't feel like a full-on horror movie, but that was a character study through and through on a character who is, you know, villainous. So that was a bit different, and I think it worked a bit better. MaXXXine, I felt like it just didn't go far enough into the horror avenue. And especially when you get to the end of the movie, without spoiling it, it felt like a completely different genre altogether. And I'm sure you guys, if you've seen the movie, you know what genre I'm talking about. It felt like a completely different genre, and I wasn't completely opposed to it. I was still entertained by it, but again, it just felt kind of strange to me. I feel like I would have wanted just a little bit more horror to it. Another thing is that some character motivations and decisions didn't make a lot of sense to me in the moment. And I can't really get into specifics here because, again, spoilers. But a lot of it had to do with MaXXXine's character especially. I feel like there's a lot of moments where she could have made her problems a lot easier if she just did something a little bit differently, but she just refused to. And I felt like it was a little odd for her character to do that. I understood initially, because at first she was apprehensive, you know, about doing something, but later on in the movie, I'm sitting there like, so much has been going on at this point. You not doing what you should be doing in this instance just kind of doesn't make sense to me. And the last negative I want to say is that although I'm okay with movies getting a little campy here or there, there's nothing wrong with that, there's a couple moments in this movie that feel really out of place with its campiness. Like, there's a couple lines of dialogue that is extremely campy. Like, I'm talking full on camp. But the rest of the movie doesn't really feel that way. Like, the rest of the movie takes things mostly serious. So like, these just random lines of campiness that don't really fit in with the scene just don't really work for me. There's a couple moments like that in the movie that every time it happened, I was just like, why did that character say that? Like, it's a very odd placement of that piece of dialogue. And that only happened a couple times, but it was enough to kind of irk me a little bit. And I was sitting there at the end of the movie like, yeah, that didn't fit the scene at all. Overall, I think it's a good movie. I definitely recommend watching it. But in total, I would give it a 7.2 out of 10, which might sound kind of low for me, but honestly, that's not a bad rating at all. My rating scale works at like a 6 out of 10s, roughly like around average for me. Anything below that, it means I don't really like the movie. If it's above 6 out of 10, it means I do like the movie. So if it's a 6.5 to 7 out of 10, it's probably just like an okay movie. I think it's fine. But if it's like 7 and higher, I think it's pretty good. Like, I do think this is a good movie. I just don't think it you know, excels to being a great movie. And I'm not going to do a full ranking of the X trilogy. I'm not going to do a separate video on that. I just don't think it's necessary. But if you guys want to know my ranking, I'm just going to do it right here, because why not? We'll just get it out of the way real quick. In third place, the worst of the X trilogy, in my opinion, is gonna be X. I think X is the weakest. And like I said this before when the movie first came out. I think it's fine. I don't think it's a bad movie. I just thought it was not as good as a lot of people were saying. I thought it was a, you know, fun little slasher that had some really interesting scenes that were kind of really fucked up, but interesting. And I liked it. I would probably give it like a 7 out of 10. I don't remember what I gave when it first came out, but right now off the top of my head, I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10. So just a little bit below MaXXXine, which means yes, in second place would be MaXXXine, which was, I gave it a 7.2. So MaXXXine, I think again, it was a good movie. I enjoyed it, just not necessarily on the level of being great. But in first place though, would of course be Pearl. I thought Pearl was genuinely a really great movie. I would definitely give it something above an 8, probably like an 8.3, 8.4 out of 10. I thought Pearl was a really interesting character study, and going back to the whenever it took place at the 1920s, I forget exactly when it took place, but way back when. And I thought it was a really brilliant character study, and by far had Mia Goth's best performance of this entire trilogy. Overall, I'm happy this trilogy exists. I think it's a really interesting look on horror. I think all three of these movies stand on their own, and they're very distinct and unique, which is very weird for a trilogy to have three movies that are so different from one another, but they work off of each other so well. The themes are pretty consistent, and although I haven't loved any of these movies really, none of them are like my top favorite horror movies of all time, I do think this is a really solid and consistent horror trilogy that I definitely would recommend everyone go see. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you guys on my next one. Peace out.